So hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Pete Timmerman. I'm the director of the Webster University Film Series. This afternoon's discussion of People's Republic of Desire is a collaboration between the Webster Film Series and the Confucius Institute at Webster University. Briefly about the film series, we're St. Louis's only nonprofit movie theater that operates year-round under normal circumstances. Of course, during the pandemic, we haven't been operating the normal way. Usually we show movies in person in the Winifred Moore Auditorium, which is in Webster Hall on Webster University's main campus in St. Louis. But we haven't shown any movies in person since March of last year. In the meantime, we have been still doing programming. We have a virtual cinema where we've been booking new films and new restorations of older films that we would have liked to have booked in person, to where you pay $10 or $12 to rent them, and then half the proceeds go to us. It helps us keep the lights on while the pandemic is keeping the doors closed. If you go, our main website is webster.edu/film series. You can look at our offerings. We've got, like right now, we have a French film called Slalom and an American film called Mothne, Towards the Ocean, Towards the Shore. There's a Norwegian film called Hope. Tomorrow we've got a Congolese documentary called Downstream to Kinshasa that's going to open. But yeah, it's worth keeping an eye on our programming. If you prefer the social media route, on Twitter and Instagram, we're at WU Film Series, and on Facebook, we're at Webster Film Series. We also do a pretty good number of these virtual events like the one that you're attending now. We collaborate with the Confucius Institute about once a month, give or take, sometimes more, sometimes less. It's usually only during the main semester, the fall and spring semesters. So today's event is the last one until probably September. We're working out the details of our next collaboration as we speak. But we do other virtual events as well. There's a Thursday night speakers series to where every Thursday night we have a different speaker on a different topic each month. I doubt that this is of a lot of interest to those of you in the audience for this today, but our featured director for April is the Italian horror director, Lucio Fulci. So if you want to do a double feature of Zoom talks about films at 7 p.m. tonight, we're doing a discussion of the Fulci film House by the Cemetery from 1981. But yeah, with regards to the Confucius Institute, I like to collaborate with them whenever I can. They always invite the best speakers. We've had academics from all over the nation. The last time we collaborated with them, we had a Shaolin master, but I'm always delighted to do presentations with the Confucius Institute. Today's speaker is Dr. Yuqian Yan, who I just met, I want to say like last September or so. I've never actually met her in person. It's all been virtual. We're virtual friends at this point. But yeah, I met her for the first time back in September, and then we've had her for, I think, 4 or so of these events. We keep inviting her back, but that's how it's been with the Confucius Institute and me. I'm always very happy with all of our events and all of the speakers that they pick. So I'd like to thank my friends at the Confucius Institute, Patty and Courtney, for helping. Well, I say helping, they did pretty much all of the work. So thanks for doing all of the work, Patty and Courtney. But yeah, as for Yuqian, she is a postdoctoral teaching fellow of Chinese cinema and performing culture at Washington University. The first time we featured her, she spoke about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And like I said, we've invited her back several times since. I'm going to get out of the way for now. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. After Yuqian's presentation, we'll have a discussion, answer questions from the audience and that type of thing. But feel free to enter them at any time, and we'll get to them when her presentation ends. But with that, thanks everyone for coming. I'll get out of the way, and Yuqian, you can take the floor.
Thank Pete for the introduction, and also want to thank Patty for inviting me here. This is my second talk at the film series, and I'm very glad and appreciate the opportunity to discuss this film with everyone here. I first watched this film back in 2019 in Chicago, and I remember after the screening, I just couldn't talk for quite a while. Just on the one hand, there was this overwhelming sense of sensorial overload, and on the other hand, there's this quite saddening effect. Just like I knew, I've heard of the online streaming culture in China, but I knew little until I watched this film. It really opened up a new world, and somehow alienating world to me. But this is certainly not a minor cultural phenomenon in China. It's actually quite mainstream. And I did some research and I want to share with you some latest statistics of this cultural phenomenon in China. the users of online streaming service in China has increased from 3.4 million users in 2016 to over 600 million. Almost like half of the population in China is actually watching online streaming videos to some extent. Of course, not everyone is watching the talent show that's featured in this documentary. Most people actually are attracted to the e-com live streamings, which is almost like the internet equivalent of TV shopping shows, where you have those MCs selling products at a discounted price, mostly hosted by the big internet online shopping platforms in China, like Taobao, Jingdong, and Pinduoduo. But talent show was the largest group, attracts the second largest group of viewers, followed by the game streamings, concert streamings, and sports streamings. The market size of this online streaming industry also skyrocketed. So you can see in 2020, the estimated market size is 164 billion RMB, which is about 24 billion US dollars. It's a huge market in China. So I'm not pretending to be an expert in Chinese internet culture, which I am not. My talk today will mainly focus on the documentary itself. And this documentary, although when we think, I assume when people watch this documentary, they would immediately think about the reality of Chinese internet streaming culture, but the documentary is not a transparent model of reality, and it always involves the filmmaker's intention. And here in this talk, and my talk today is really want to delve into how the filmmaker himself presents this particular phenomenon with his own perspectives and on understandings of the phenomenon. So the filmmaker Wu Hao, he is a self-made filmmaker. He never went to any film school. He actually studied biology in college, and this film is his second documentary, feature-length documentary. And though in 2013 he made The Road to Fame, which is a documentary that features the cohort from China Central Drama Institute. They are the staging of a Broadway show called Fame. So similar to People's Republic of China, this documentary also tells about the younger Chinese generation's aspiration for success and wealth. And recently he made this documentary about the quarantine life in Wuhan called 76 Days. And Wu Hao is a US-based filmmaker. He lives in New York, and his work mainly targets at the international audience, but he also has got some small-scale screenings in the independent Chinese documentary circle in China, so not like big theatrical release, but private viewings among close friends and cinephile groups in China. But his film also differs quite significantly from the general trend of independent Chinese documentaries. So those films, although the style started to diversify in recent years, but still generally independent Chinese documentary would take this character-centered ethnographic approach to documentary filmmaking, and they like to focus on marginalized, underprivileged group in China. And it normally takes this direct cinema style, which the filmmaker would spend quite considerable amount of time before and during the filming process to build certain kind of trust with their subject of filming. And they like to use handheld camera, long takes, and largely observational mode to create a sense of on-the-spot realism, as a contrast to the more polished style of script documentary that produced by the central television stations or the official news agents in China. And because of this technique, these documentaries tend to tell more intimate stories about some certain individuals or a small group of people. But Wu Hao's film, we see some traces of this in this documentary, especially when it comes to the depiction of Xiaoyong, Big Li's fans. But he is certainly more ambitious than producing this direct cinema style documentary, and I will get into that later. And I also want to mention another documentary on a similar topic. It was released 1 year after this film. It's called Present Perfect, made by Zhu Shenzhe, who is also a US-based filmmaker. And this film is a compilation film. So basically, Zhu Shenzhe downloads hundreds of hours of footages of these streaming videos and then added them together into her own creative work. So in the compilation documentary by Zhu Shenzhe, the intention of the filmmaker is very much hidden behind the invisible process of selection and editing. But in Wu Hao's film, he is certainly more keen on displaying his own attitudes and own takes on the whole phenomenon. So early on in the film, right before after the opening sequence where Da Bao introduces our trends, a group of fresh MCs in her studio, and we see this quite dazzling sequence that created by CGI technologies that deliberately integrates the virtual world and the real world. And it immediately poses this question of how to capture reality in a heavily virtualized reality. So, so the traditional method of observational documentary, the observational mode, where you just put the camera there and record whatever is happening in front of the camera, becomes inadequate in the present world, where the presence of a figure doesn't normally line up with his mind, especially when he or she is staring at the screen. So although he's physically in one space, but his mind is always somewhere else. So how do we present this kind of reality through documentary footage? And Wu Hao's answer to this is that we need to be creative with the footage that we use, or we need to process the raw material we captured in life to deliver this integrated reality that we are experiencing right now. So we see all these images are actually a composite of a real space and his process, or his creation of the effect of internet culture on the social space of China. And I want to focus specifically on this image. The first I thought this was an image of Shanghai, and then he's marking the important companies, internet companies in China, so the WeChat, QQ, Sina, and that. But then I started to do some research and try to verify if the logos actually identifying the offices of these internet companies, but I couldn't verify that. So, and then I started to question whether this image itself is a composite image. I don't know, for those of you who are from Shanghai or more familiar with the cityscape of Shanghai, you probably know more than I do, but for me, it almost looks like a composite image in itself. The background is clearly the skyline of Shanghai, the Pudong area, but what is in the foreground seems to be another city, or can even be a composite of the cityscape made up with different architectures. And most of these internet companies are Chinese internet companies, except for one at the corner here that you see, it's TripAdvisor. And the reason that Wu Hao included this foreign company in this landscape is because I believe is he actually worked for TripAdvisor before he became a documentary filmmaker, and he was the manager of the Chinese market for TripAdvisor. So he, and also because of this personal experience, he got very interested in the whole internet culture in China, and also got personal connections with the upper level personnel at YY, the streaming platform that he features in this documentary. So he wants to show the large scale of this internet culture, rather than focusing on one particular or a small group of people. So he wants to map out the underneath structure of how the streaming industry functions in China. And the aesthetic of this film is quite similar to a fiction film rather than the traditional documentary style that I mentioned. And so he uses very fast-paced editing and integrated with animation aesthetics to create this rather surrealistic effect. And to some extent, even I think some people even described this as a sci-fi film. And in fact, I think Wu Hao is currently making a new project, which is a sci-fi version of People's Republic of China. I'm personally very curious about his new work and how he would further process and animize the reality of online streaming culture. So the People's Republic of China, during the 2 years of filming, he started from 2014 up until 2016, and then he spent another 2 years for post-production. He received top-down support from the YY company. So towards the end of the film, we see a brief interview with the CEO, and he actually was the one who helped Wu Hao to find the interviewees, and the company suggested 10 MCs, the most popular ones from their company, and among them, Wu Hao picked Shen Man and Big Li as his subject matter. And the structure of this film is also very much like a fictional film. It is structured around 2 annual galas to create some sense of narrative suspense and the climax, and make it more enjoyable to watch with those narrative hooks and causal effects as narrative motivation. So, and the parallel between the female and the male MC is also a quite common technique used in narrative films. In narrative films, you will see the storyline of the male protagonist and the female protagonist parallel, and then eventually emerge. And here too, not just in terms of that general life, but also we have more specific pairing of sequences as the documentary unfolds. So early on, after the introduction of these two characters, we have sequences of them visiting their family or having dinner with their family, and to reveal the general family background of the two protagonists. They are both from quite moderate families in rural China, and they're self-made celebrities thanks to the burgeoning of streaming culture in China. And then comes with the first gala, and which creates this contrast between Lao Li as someone who loses the competition and then runs through this long process of depression, versus Shen Man as the winner, and her life transforms into a more luxurious style, and we see her new apartment, her new cars. But then the two stories converge in a quite interesting way in this parallel sequences of the hotel life. So for Lao Li, he is, for Big Li, he is hosting this fan mobilization campaign in this luxurious hotel in Xiamen, whereas Shen Man, who after experiencing enormous success, also has this this emotional stress and personal problems that she has to process in a luxurious hotel, Ritz-Carlton, in one of China's most famous resort island, Hainan. And interestingly, he is actually accompanied with Big Li's wife, Da Bao, a trainer of MCs, and also her former trainers. And then the film eventually ends with the last, the second gala, where both of them actually lose and then come to a period of reflection and recession. So delineate, conveying a rather pessimistic note towards the end, that their fames are doomed to be ephemeral, and the whole career of being an MC is not something that is going to last, and that is also a concern that runs throughout the film. So where are they going? Where should they move on after their career ends? And another interesting thing that comes out through this comparison is a unique gender perspective. So Lao Li, Big Li, his relation with the patron more resembles the romanticized idea of the Chinese brotherhood in traditional Chinese culture, whereas for Shen Man, because she is a female MC, and she is almost forced into this actress-patron relation that is built upon in explicit or unspoken rules that puts her in very unfavored situation. So gender issue is something not particularly explicit, but certainly a lot underlying issue that the filmmaker wants to deal with in this documentary. And besides this narrative, this temporal narrative, there's also an underlying narrative of the power structure of the Chinese internet streaming culture. So at the beginning of the film, Shen Man explains this triangular relationship between the hoster, the poor viewers or the poor fans, and the rich patrons, and so that at the very beginning, that is already a very powerful structure that reveals the power dynamics of this particular industry in China. But after the second gala, it is revealed that actually even the rich patrons, they are not the ones who dominate the game. There is a hidden power, which is the agent, or in Chinese, it is actually more literally translated as the union that's behind the whole picture and manipulating who will become the most famous MC. So it is not a story of the realization of personal dreams through personal effort, but rather who is selected by the agent to become this famous. So the story kind of shifted from the emphasis on the possibility, or at least certain kinds of possibility of personal agent, to a rather depressive story of the either parts of this triangular relationship were just the puppet of capital. And then after the second gala, it is revealed that not even the agent was the big boss behind everything, but ultimately it is the platform who makes most money out of it and who is the rule-making creator. So they are the ones who are actually controlling how this game plays and making most of the money out of this. So I think this narrative from the possibility of agency to the revelation of or the players as mere puppets. It's really another quite saddening effect of this documentary in showing the illusion of this self-made successful celebrity story to the revelation of everything is simply a game of capitalism. And because of this rather rational mapping of the power dynamics, or what I call a social scientific approach to the documentary making by the filmmaker, we kind of feel rather distanced from the characters presented in the film, or at least that the film is not promoting any strong emotional identification with any of these characters. I don't find any one of them particularly sympathetic. They are more or less presented as the representatives of their particular group. So Shaman, the Big Li, as representative of the MCs, and the Xiao Yong is a symbol of the poor viewer group, and Song Ge as the stereotypical image of this nouveau rich group in China who has lots of money and want to show off in front of the hosts and the poor viewers. And they collectively form this cycle of desire that's controlled by flow of capital. So what Hao tries to present here is not a group of people that worth sympathy, but a quite rational depiction of the overall structure of this industry in China. And he also uses quite specific techniques to further this alienating effect or this distancing effect. For example, the interface he uses resembles the game interface, and because the original interface of YY or other online streaming websites are quite confusing. We have lots of distractions on the screen, have comments flying across the screen and gifts popping up, and he wants to rationalize or make it more accessible to audience, to his audience. So he redesigned the interface and emphasizes the most important elements in this design the game. So we have VIPs, the most important patrons depicted as kings, queens, earls, And the viewers were mainly represented as numbers rather than individuals. And then the chat boxes where the MC and the viewers interact, and the gift box, the monetized way of tipping their favorite presenters. And it creates this dazzling visual, audio-visual, and experiential effect through recreating the interface of the online streaming. And towards the end of that sequence, we see how quite innovatively transfers one of this faceless poor viewer into pixels, which reformed and then form a real figure, a real fan in reality, who starts to talk about how much he admires Shen Man. So the visualization of this connection between the online of video and offline world through the use of special animated effect. And the connection between the visual and the real world is another important focus of this film. And really, how do we distinguish the two, or is there a way to distinguish the two in the virtual world of online streaming rooms? It appeared to be a space of escapism. So it is a place where people can forget about their reality and then just build this interactive relation with the viewer. But in fact, as it reveals gradually throughout the film, the virtual world is in fact a reflection of the reality, or even amplifies the problems of the reality. So it is very much built upon the rules, functions, and the mechanisms that the real world actually works. And people in the real world and their real life also becomes increasingly virtualized. And it is hard for us to distinguish to what extent we are living in our physical reality and how much our whole life is interconnected with the virtual world. And the two worlds are actually transferable. So we spend money on gifts to tip the MCs in the virtual world, and we invest real time, real invention, which have real consequences in our real life. So it is really hard to draw the line, although throughout the film it is constantly asked, how do we draw the line? So in the sequence where Shen Man spends time with Da Bao, Big Li's wife, and they're talking about how to resist the request of the patrons, and the trainer said, yeah, your livelihood actually depends on their affection. So I can never tell you that you can reject them, but what you need to do is to draw a clear line between online and offline life. But the question here is it possible to draw a clear line for these MCs, especially the female ones? And they are asked for female for sexual favor, because the desire really doesn't stay in one world, but cross the line between the two worlds. So the virtual world, which is very much created by the logic of reality, actually amplifies the problems in the real life and make us reflect upon what is going wrong and what are the problems that we are dealing with in the real life. And this convergence between the real life and the virtual life is foregrounded by the filmmaker through his special techniques and composed images. So he would put the streaming videos onto the virtual, the public screens in the cityscape. And first, when I first watched this film, I thought these were probably real footages that he took from the real cities, but then I realized that these are actually images post-processed by him to really imply this feeling of desire elicited through these online streaming performance were permeating through the urban space in contemporary China. This is another comment that the filmmaker is deliberately making through his particular aesthetics. And the counterpart of the screen, or the multiple appearance of the screen, is the presence of camera. And the presence of camera is certainly an important issue when we talk about documentary filmmaking, because documentary, which claims to be the presentation of reality, is often a negotiation between the filmmaker and the subject with the presence of the camera. And in this particular film, the online streaming culture has already an intrinsic part of the camera built into it, which is the streaming camera. So even before we see the character of Shaman, the first shot we get of her apartment was a shot of the camera on her laptop, her streaming camera. But the streaming camera differs from the filmmaker's camera in the sense that it functions more as a mirror. So Shaman sees what her viewers see of her image on the computer. So it is a synchronized process of filming and seeing her image as being filmed. Whereas for the filmmaker's camera, which is largely invisible in the documentary itself, the subject has no control of how their image is filmed. They might be aware that there is a camera, but they have no idea how they are presented in a particular shot in the film, and not to mention the edited result of their appearance or their image in the documentary. So they are rendered more vulnerable or powerless in front of the filmmaker's camera. And in this film, there's a third camera that is the camera by this interview group from Hunan TV station. And this camera differs from the filmmaker's camera in the sense that because the Hu Hao's film took almost 2 years to finish, so the subjects become gradually used to the presence of the camera, and they become less aware of it when they are talking and performing in front of it. Whereas for the interview camera, the subject is highly aware of its presence. And it is interesting that before the interview started, we see Shaman is using her own phone as a mirror. So she turns on the camera and to constantly check her own experience. That is the familiar use of camera that she lives with, just to use a camera as a mirror to check her appearance. But then she had to put it down and face the interview camera, which is quite out of her control. And then during this interview process, we also see her break into tears in the middle of it when she's talking about her family relations and her childhood experience. And she even, to the point that she asked the camera crew to stop filming. But they didn't actually stop filming, and we see the camera runs through, and then she gradually recovers and starts to talk. But that always raised the ethical issue of should the filmmaker stop filming when your subjects ask you to. And it is also interesting to think about her breakdown or her break into tears as the revelation of the true authentic emotion, or to what extent do we see her as performing in front of this camera that she is highly aware of? And so to sum up, I think any documentary should be seen as a result of a negotiation between the subject's intention and the filmmaker's intention. And in most cases, the subject doesn't have much control of their own image. And Big Lee, after he watched this documentary, he made not a complaint, but kind of negative comment about how negative the film represents him. And he thinks that it lacks the positive energy. He struggled towards the realization of dreams. Those are not foregrounded or featured in this documentary. It is a pity for him. But of course, the intention of the filmmaker is certainly not to promote online streaming culture as the way of dream realization in Chinese culture. But the filmmaker really wants to create this critical distance from the subject, and through this critical distance, mapping out the underlying structure of the industry in China, and making people to reflect upon this particular phenomenon, and also in a larger sense, the contemporary Chinese society, which is very much reflected through the online streaming culture in China. Okay, so I think I am already running over time, so I'll stop here, and I welcome questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Yuqian. That was wonderful. We actually had a lot of questions prepared, but you answered almost all of them. So I'm left with nothing. I'm not left with nothing, but no, a lot of my questions were related to the film's exploration of like gamification of culture and how he would juxtapose, the way Shenman looks on the screen versus how she looks in real life. He would cut back and forth between, the filters and the makeup with nothing, but you addressed almost all of those. And then meanwhile, as the presentation was going on, I don't know how cognizant you were of this, but questions kept popping up in the Q&A box, and I was getting excited. Oh, we've got good questions, but it was people that wanted a recording of the presentation. So you did such a good presentation. Nobody has any questions at all, and everybody wants a recording of it. So thanks. I do have a few questions, I guess, to start. And in the meantime, for everyone watching, please don't be shy about putting your questions in the Q&A box, because I'm sure your questions are better than mine. But I'm curious what you think in terms of if this film is a cautionary tale, like is it a damning portrayal of this type of internet culture, or is it a celebration of it? What tone does it take, and how does it go about expressing it?
Yeah, for me, I think it definitely has some cautionary message in the documentary, although the filmmaker in former interviews, he actually denies that, and he said he doesn't have any particular standpoint in the making of the documentary, and he just wants to present this rather objective view, or mapping out the reality of it. But I think the documentary clearly betrays what he's saying. And it also depends on our own perspective. I think how we understand the phenomenon also largely affects how we understand the intention of the filmmaker. Because for us, it is clearly a criticism of capitalism, or the overwhelming desire for money and fame in contemporary Chinese society. But maybe for someone who's in hedge fund or venture capital, they might see this documentary as presenting them a great opportunity for investment. So it really depends on our own position as a viewer, I think. And because he started this documentary from the top level of the company, and he was quite aware of his own position, or his representation of the company and the culture although he told the CEO at the very beginning that I'm not going to make a promotional documentary for your company, there might be some critical points, and that the CEO was totally fine with that. So he kind of has enough freedom to express his own ideas through this documentary.
Are you alarmed at all that we seem to have gone in this direction? I mean, this movie was released initially 3 years ago, but here we are doing basically like an academic highbrow version of what the people in the documentary are doing. Like all we need is like a virtual tuition, like tip jar to pay for the education that we're all getting here. But do you think, I don't know, I talked about in the synopsis for this film, it seems like Wu Hao is on the vanguard of kind of understanding trends in culture. And I think that if he sees this as a problem, it's a bigger problem now. How do you feel about it?
So how do I feel about this phenomenon in China?
Yeah, like the culture, it seems to be snowballing to where it's every year it gets bigger and bigger. Is this something that we should be worried about?
Yeah, I think what needs to be worried about is really the fundamental inequality, or the growing inequality in the Chinese society, and the lack of upward mobility for this Diaosi group. That it just nowadays it really becomes more and more difficult for this group of people to have any kind of opportunity for success, and what all they could do is to just indulge themselves in the binge watching of the online streaming videos, and imagine someday that they can become someone like Big Li or Shen Man, because they original from their group, and they are the exceptional cases who become famous through this platform. So, but on the other hand, this, as the document shows us, this can be a total illusion, and it becomes more and more impossible given the rules of the game the film is depicts for us. So yeah, I actually have a quite pessimistic view of this situation, but it is not the streaming service per se. I think it really reflects the more underlying problems or the concerns of Chinese society in general.
Well, that's been a trend in American documentaries for a number of years, just examination of income inequality and also internet bullying and things like that. He touches on a lot of these topics here.
Mm.
What, for like the Diaosi group, for example, has watching this replaced something else? Like, did it used to be television, or did it used to be sports, or like, where is this coming in terms of like media consumption? Did something go away to make room for this?
Yeah, I think television is certainly one of the declining media in China nowadays, and because cell phone is so popular in China, you can't do anything without cell phone in China. You make payments through cell phone. All the activities are actually on your cell phone. So people in China, not that many people have computers, but almost all of them, not all of them. I think the statistics about over 60% of the Chinese population has a cell phone. So cell phone is takes up the majority of their lifetime, and also their hope and their sense of community, the sense of interaction with other people. The people like Big Xiaoyong, Big Li's fan. He, after his work, or he does is to watch the multiple shows, maybe not just the online streamings, but also TikTok and short videos and news, things like that on the phone. So definitely a sense of real life interaction, sense of community, and maybe TV consumption has declined and replaced by this virtual interactions and communications.
We've got a couple of questions. The first one's from Jessica. She says, I listened to an interview with Wu Hao, and he mentioned how there was a dip in interest in live streaming once TikTok rose to popularity. With the pandemic having a major influence on our use of the internet, it seems like we've come to depend on virtual interaction to a crippling degree. Do you have any ideas about where we're headed next as a global internet culture?
I think TikTok certainly is a rival to the online streaming culture, but TikTok also has the streaming aspect. I think many users are actually using the streaming function of TikTok. So cannot say one is replacing the other. They are growing simultaneously. The market of online streaming culture keeps growing, as the statistic I showed. So I don't know if there will come a new media that will replace this particular culture, but at the moment it seems that it is keep growing and evolving.
We have a question from Angela Zhang. Do you think there's room in this culture of live streaming to evolve in the future? Has it changed in any way in the years since the release of this film?
Yeah, I think there are new directions that online streaming culture is heading towards in China. So besides the talent shows, we also see workers live streaming their working hours, and also this. So from Shenze's documentary Perfect Present, and see disabled people started to use streaming as a way to communicate with the outside world, so or as a means of self-expression. So there are positive aspects of it, or potentials in this culture as a way of opening up venues of self-expression and having your voice heard by other groups of people. But the problem is, are all the online streaming activities will eventually become what the talent show, the YY platform leads to, and the control or controlled by the agent, the platform, the capital, rather than a free space for expression? Or is it possible to carve a space that is independent from the grasp of capitalism, that's or making it for more as a public sphere, or for more positive, socially beneficial activities?
We have a question from Charles Jacobson. He says, well, it starts with a comment just on the difficulty of a single person to stand out in countries with such large populations. And he's wondering if the film shows a good method of standing out in such a large population. Like, is streaming a viable option if you wanted to make yourself known in a large population?
Yeah, there is certainly the possibility of getting yourself known through the online streaming platform. But if we think of the number of participants in this culture, there are like millions of online streamers in China, and how many of them actually become well-known? And not to mention that the whole process is not completely dependent on how talented you are, but to a large extent, a matter of if you are picked by a specific agent or a specific union. So for me, I still have a rather pessimistic take on how this whole industry is evolving. Well, I mean, the talent show, but as I said, there are other areas of innovative use of the online streaming technology. So that's something that we can probably hope for.
Wu Hao has such a tendency to really emphasize numbers in this film. Like, there's always kind of tickers of, viewers and, how much money each person has spent. And then each time a character is introduced, it tells you their monthly income, or sometimes how much they spend on live streamers monthly. What do you think motivates his emphasis on numbers in this way?
I think we are currently living in a world of numbers, and there is this big data. The big data is such a catchy word now, and everything is digitized or quantized. And so for me, that's probably one of the reasons why he emphasizes so much about numbers, and especially for those Del's viewers, and they exist as numbers. No one care about their individuality, and they matter as a number. And so the only way for them to get certain attention is to form a large number, and then they will get attentions of the rich patrons and who wants to show off in front of this large crowd, but that really effaces their individuality or their existence as an actual human being, but they only exist as numbers.
I only have one last question. So for those of you in the audience, if you have any questions, now's the last call. So please put them in, or else we'll miss them. But the last question for now is, can you speak to the ways in which the film represents greater, more deeply rooted issues in our reality? The film serves as an example of capitalization of loneliness and desperation that manifests in every facet of our lives. It seems like there are no safe spaces void of exploitation for the sake of money. So to go back, the question at the beginning, can you speak to the ways in which this film represents greater, more deeply rooted issues in our reality?
Yeah, certainly I think the most prominent problem and is really, as I mentioned before, the social inequality in China, and the stratification that prevents the flow from across classes. So it is becoming more and more difficult for people coming from the countryside to climb the ladder and become successful. So in this sense, these online streaming services serves as some kind of outlet for them to forget about their stress and to accept the reality, because they still have some satisfying aspect in their life that can peace them or can make them forget to not fight against social inequality. And as long as I have the streaming video to relax and I'm satisfied. So that's the negative effect of these online streaming services is almost like a spiritual opium for them to forget about reality. So in this sense, they do serve as a space of escapism, but at the same time, this space they escape into actually is created by the very structure, the very social inequality that they are living in. So even this escape is to a large extent an illusion to them.
Well, thank you so much, Yuqian. I'll point out, I actually hadn't seen this film myself until you recommended it to me, so I'm grateful that you recommended it. And then for those of you in the audience, if you haven't seen it, Wu Hao's newest film is called 76 Days. It is, I think, the first completed film about COVID-19. It covers the titles in reference to the period of lockdown in Wuhan. About this time last year, it began in late January and ended in early April last year, but those are the 76 days. It's a very strong film. It was on the short list for the Best Documentary Oscar this year, but it didn't actually make it to the nominees, just the short list. That said, I thoroughly recommend it, but it's a rough watch. It's a little too soon, I think. I don't know. It might play a little better, like when we get a little past the environment that we're in now. But it's a strong film, and I think he's a very interesting filmmaker who's worth keeping your eye on for the reasons we've talked about. He's very kind of on top of trends. I feel like trends is an understatement. He's on top of like major happenings in the world and in culture. But yeah, once again, Yuqian, it's been a real pleasure. It's always so much fun to work with you. Thanks to my friends at the Confucius Institute too, and thanks to everyone for coming.
Thank you, Pete.